Welcome again to Making Sauerkraut over Zoom. Today we have a very simple sauerkraut recipe to share with you. We love this recipe because it's very forgiving. It's also very customizable. So today we're going to start with the very basic, but always know that you can customize, you can make this your own. So I'd like to start with the things that we have in front of us, things that you may need to cook along. Let's go through what we have here on the table.
I have some big metal cooking bowls, mixing bowls. One I'm going to be using for compost or getting rid of stuff bowl, and then one that I will actually be making the sauerkraut in. We've got a couple knives, cutting board. We also have our cabbage here. We have a big thing of sea salt. Some people feel safer using a grater to either grate your cabbage or other vegetables. I like to cut mine. Whatever works best for you, that's totally fine. We just wanted to have this here to be able to show you. I also have a spatula, and then we also have some, this is a leftover peanut butter jar, but this is what I will be putting the sauerkraut in to start its fermentation process. We also have gloves because we're trying to be safe, and so I will be putting these on before we start making sauerkraut. Before we get started, are there any other questions? Now, I will be sending a recipe to all of you along with this recorded video and a bunch of resources. So you can go through those and you'll be able to make it along with us in this video or with the recipe.
And before we dive in too deep into our recipe, I just want to cover a few basic points of how to keep your kitchen safe. I mentioned sauerkraut's a very forgiving recipe, but there are still some things that you can do to make sure that you're not introducing any potentially harmful bacteria or any unsafe kitchen practices. The first of those, as we are hearing so often these days, is to make sure that you are beginning with clean, washed hands. Gloves are also an option, and today we are going the gloves route as we're teaching. You also need to make sure that you are starting with a clean cooking surface. So for me, that means it's very important for me to have a cutting board that is very clean, may not contain any traces of something potentially dangerous like raw meat. And today we've got a clean cutting board and a clean worktop so that there's not any cross-contamination as we are cooking. This also goes for how you are arranging your produce in your refrigerator, making sure that nothing is at risk of dripping on it, and that your produce is washed. So we have a clean, washed, locally grown cabbage to start with. And lastly, I want to cover some basic knife skills. When I came to Allegheny Mountain Institute, I was shocked to discover I had been holding knives wrong my entire life. So if you are like me and tend to hold your knife from the back of the handle, know that a safer way that gives you more control is to move your hand up so that it's halfway on the blade, and to move your first knuckle and your thumb to the blade to give yourself a little bit more control. With your offhand, the hand that is not holding the knife, you want to make a claw. So making sure that your fingertips are down with your fingernails touching your cutting board. That presents a safe surface so that if I were to bump my knife into my fingers, I'm cutting a flat surface and my fingernails are protecting me so that I'm not cutting my fingers. Blood and pain are not recommended in any of our cooking demonstrations. We hope to keep you free from them at home too. So without further ado, let's jump into our recipe and get started.
Okay, so first I just washed my hands and I am going to put these gloves on. So basically with making sauerkraut, what you're doing is that you are fermenting this cabbage. This cabbage, like all fruits and vegetables, have a beneficial bacteria on it called
lactobacillus.
Thank you. I am terrible at saying these things, and that is why Grayson is here to help me. And that bacteria that's on it is a beneficial bacteria. So once that bacteria is under the brine, and you'll see we'll make a brine together using the juice from this cabbage. Once the beneficial bacteria is under that brine, it actually starts turning the sugars of this cabbage into lactic acid. And so that is actually going to help preserve the vegetable. Sorry if you hear ringing in the background. It's going to actually preserve this and make it into the sauerkraut that we all know and love. So let's get started. So I'm going to try to, I also did not know how to use a knife properly when I first came into AMI. So this is a pretty big sized cabbage, good size. You can use smaller ones, you can use a medium sized one, whatever floats your boat and how much sauerkraut you actually want to make. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to get this core, you probably can't see it that well, but this core out. Now it's kind of hard to do with a whole cabbage, so the first thing I want to do, if I can, is actually cut the cabbage in half. And then you can kind of see the core a little bit easier in here and how far it goes down. So what you're going to want to do, flip it over, kind of make a V cut. And you'll get that core out.
Now, one of our bowls here that we've set aside is our compost bowl. So we're tossing that set of core into compost.
And you can actually save the cores for a later portion, and I can show you how you can use the cores to help weigh down your sauerkraut. There are also other ways to do that. So I just missed a little spot of the core, so I'm just making sure that it's cut out of the way. And so the next thing you're going to want to do is actually cut the cabbage up. So you don't dirt or black markings or anything. So there's like a little black dot here on it. You can take the outer leaf off. I already took a couple of the outer leaves off before we started, so I have to do that. That does not bother you. I'm just going to cut off this little mark here. You want a pretty clean cabbage because you don't want to have any harmful bacteria getting into your sauerkraut while you were trying to make it. So that makes sense to get any core markings off. So now, if you look, both of these are pretty clean and beautiful. And then we can start.
As Tess begins to cut the cabbage, do I see a hand raised from the audience? Are there any questions so far? Feel free to either unmute your microphone or write your questions into the chat.
Okay, so it's going to come out like this, kind of. And then what you can do is you can either just easily break it apart like this, and you can even cut it in half the second time. And it'll be in here, I'll break it up for you. So if you get a big piece like this, I am actually going to cut this piece in thirds, make it easier in the long run. And then I'm just going to break it apart into the mixing bowl that we have here. And there are going to be some parts, like this is a really thick part of the cabbage. You can use it, still going to be tasty, or you don't have to. It's just whatever you feel comfortable with using and how you want your sauerkraut to be. Since this is a thick part, I'm just going to slice it thinner and put it in here. And the thing about sauerkraut, as I know Grayson was saying earlier, this is just a very simple sauerkraut that we're doing. Pretty much you can just use cabbage and salt to make sauerkraut. And unlike other vegetables, where you actually have to, you know, cook a brine or heat up a brine, make a brine, and add it to the vegetables, cabbage actually produces its own brine. So that is slightly different and kind of, it's easier, I think, and simpler for people who are just starting to learn how to ferment. So while I'm breaking this up, trying to do this quick enough for you. I also brought along, if y'all want to see it, I have a carrot and a jalapeno that I'm probably going to, most likely going to cut up. I like my sauerkraut a little on the spicy side.
So I'll take the corner of our cutting board, slice our carrot. If I see a little dirt on it, I'm going to go give it an extra wash. See you right back.
And the thing about carrots is that they are a perfect addition, color-wise, taste-wise, to add to a sauerkraut. Carrots, I would say, are much easier to use the grater for, and you can also do any size that you want for carrots. I like mine a little bit bigger to have that color really shining through in the finished product of the sauerkraut. So you'll get a lot of extra pieces that you just may not want in your sauerkraut. Totally fine. There's some thick pieces of cabbage that are just, you know, maybe not as yummy or as appealing, I guess, to some. And again, you can just put this as part of the core. Put that in there. So yeah, so I'm just going to keep cutting up this cabbage until we get all the way. Cut it half there and just break it up. I can kind of already see this is a pretty juicy cabbage. I see it leaking juices. I know that's hard for you guys to see that right now. So once you get your cabbage cut and into a pretty big mixing bowl, the hardest thing you can do for yourself is to try to massage cabbage in a small mixing bowl, because you really do need that room to get in there. And I will be honest, I like to use my hands to mix the cabbage.
That's why we got the gloves.
That's why we got the gloves on, and that's why I would say, if you have any cuts or anything on your hands, you're going to want salt. You're going to have to add salt to the cabbage, and it will sting. So if you do, like I do, because I work on a farm sometimes, then you're going to want to wear gloves because it may sting a bit.
Adding in our orange carrot for the nice color it brings and the extra bit of flavor.
And you can add the carrot in now. You can add it in later after you've massaged it. Either way, it's gonna come out the same. Okay, so we have the cabbage in here, and it's a lot. I mean, it fills up this bowl pretty well. Question?
Check out. No feline leukemia or FIV, so we're all good. We got some revolution here.
Hi, little Lizzie.
She was really good. Yeah, no problem.
I don't think she was feral. I think somebody dropped her off.
Yeah.
I haven't seen other kids with mother cat that was right around our house.
Yep.
So we're gonna get her.
She's
pal.
very pretty. She's got pretty strides.
Yeah, we've been. My problem is I have two dogs.
Okay, so we are now going to add the salt.
My dog Molly, is a little terrier.
So it's about a medium-sized cabbage. The recipe that I was
Oh no!
So we're gonna
add about a tablespoon and a half of salt to it. My biggest thing is that I like to taste cabbage at different steps of putting different cabbage is about a tablespoon of salt. And I'm just gonna sprinkle it.
And there's a possum here and there.
And then that's when you just get in there and just crunch. So I know you can kind of hear that right now.
But the motion that Tess
We're hoping that
is similar to what you would use to move bread, but maybe it's a little bit more fingertip incorporated.
Well, and if you get
Rolling your hands around,
yeah, and then we'll bring them in
again
together.
and
We'll
again.
just do that slowly.
You'll need to keep doing this consistently.
We had a camel, we got her.
Down that cabbage and create that brine. I'm gonna adjust our volume as much as I can now.
do you have one picked out already yet on this one? Or are you
We're looking at one named Ursa. She's supposed to be very friendly.
That may help us out with some feedback.
So I added the first tablespoon of salt, and as you can tell, once you're doing this, you're really going to start to see the cabbage wilt a little bit.
Let's hold it up to the, see if we can point it towards the camera. You can start to see how our cabbage is extra shiny and some of that moisture that was inherently in the cabbage is starting to come out as that cabbage is broken down.
Yeah. And the biggest thing I'd have to say, and I'm going to do this right now, but I like to taste it because I need to know how much salt is on the cabbage. When I'm tasting it, it's salty. What I was always told is that you want to salt your cabbage until it's a little too salty. So we all kind of have that like palate of like, I mean, everyone's palate's different, but a good guess and a good estimation for how much salt to put in is if you taste a cabbage and it's just a little too salty, that's perfect. So this cabbage currently is salty, but you know, it's not super salty. So I'm going to go ahead and add another. I'm going to try. I added another, a little less than a tablespoon, but about another tablespoon. And again, I am just going to keep doing this. And this is probably the longest part. Well, one of the longest parts when you're actually making the sauerkraut. When your sauerkraut is ready to be packed, because you'll go to the bottom of the bowl and there will be a brine or liquid forming. So that's the brine that the cabbage has made with the salt. So all the liquid is seeping out of the cabbage with the salt, and it's creating its own brine.
One thing we never want to do when making a sauerkraut is to drain that brine away from our cabbage. The more brine you have created, the better, and we want to hold on to it. We'll be using it to keep that anaerobic or unoxygenated kind of condition that we're creating once we pack our sauerkraut in the jar. And that liquid that keeps oxygen from reaching our cabbage and our other vegetables is what makes it possible for the fermentation to actually occur and to create that flavor that we're looking for.
Excuse me. So I just tasted it again, and I think it is salty enough. If anyone could see my facial expression, it was just a little too salty, and that is perfect for what we want.
You might wonder if we're starting with a product that's too salty. Are we going to end with a product that's the same way? But the fact is, the salty brine that we're creating is a famous for, instead of remaining as just pure saltiness.
And one of the biggest things that if you're seeing that, you know, there is some liquid coming out, but not a whole lot, a good point is that you can salt your cabbage, you can massage it a little bit, and then you can just let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes, even 20 minutes, and more liquid will have seeped out of the cabbage, and there should be a larger brine. Now, we don't necessarily have the time to just sit here and chat for 20 minutes. We could totally do that, but I am going to just let this sit for a little bit, and I am going to cut up a jalapeno while we kind of let this brine hopefully get stronger. I'm going to just wash this off real quick and my gloves.
And in the meantime, I'm going to return to grating our carrot, get a little bit more of that flavor in it. I love how the sweetness of the carrot really merges with the cabbage and with the
How much
spices.
What was leukemia and what was
FIV, which is like feline
Oh,
AIDS.
yeah, okay.
And they test all the ones at SPCA as well. They'll let you know if she's positive or negative. We'll administer her FDRCP vaccine in 4 weeks.
As we're having a hard time hearing, if you have questions, we'll ask you to write them into the
She's
chat.
not going to be outside, so I don't have to worry about her or anything like that.
I
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, we've gotten down to the last nub of carrot that I do not think I can safely grate. I'm going to put it aside to snack on. And in the meantime, I will add our carrot to our sauerkraut. And we'll chop that jalapeno.
We also have red pepper flakes that we're going to put in. Again, I said I like mine spicy, and I really do like mine spicy. But you can, if you have garlic or onion or anything else that, you know, you like, the flavors that you like, you can also add those to your sauerkraut. If there's any kind of spices or anything. I know cayenne pepper is a good one to add. And you can really make this sauerkraut your own. And then you can have the sauerkraut for any meal that you want, pretty much. Add fresh herbs to it, spices. There's a lot you can do with such a simple recipe. So I'm going to cut this jalapeno pretty thinly. Not super, because I just, you know, I want the spice in it. And then I'm going to put it in force. There's not a lot of jalapeno, but since all the flavors are going to be mixed together, it should not matter that much.
Another nice thing our brine does for us is to kind of distribute that flavor a little bit more equally.
Okay, so I'm going to show you what it looks like now. You can see that. See how it wilted down, probably about half the size it was before. And if you can, it's hard to see, but
Pick up a handful and see if we can see
Yeah.
that brine coming out.
you should be able to. You see all that juice coming out? I know it's probably
That's a
hard
good
to
sign.
see on, but that is a very good sign. So it means that the salt is doing the trick. And I know you can't tell, but there is a brine starting on the bottom of the bowl. I promise you, it's there. Kind of turning orange because of the carrot in here right now, which is nice. So right now we're getting all this together. We're mixing the carrot, jalapeno, just trying to get the flavors and more of this brine out. So once you feel that, you know, you've really kind of massaged this cabbage down and gotten it to where you're able to get that brine out like that, you're ready to package. Now, it's easiest if you do have a decent amount of brine on the bottom of the bowl, but it's okay if you don't have a lot, because you'll see when we're smashing putting the sauerkraut into the jars that once you're pushing it down, you'll see water or the brine rising on that, and that is exactly what you want.
So let's say a few things about our jar. This jar we have today began its life as a peanut butter jar, and that's really just fine. Any glass jar will do. We do not recommend plastic, but if you've got a glass jar that has been reused, washed really well, you can make that jar work for you. Now, you'll be surprised at the volume of the ingredients you started with and how much of this jar it fills. I think that probably we will not fill this entire jar today, having started with 1 cabbage, 1 carrot, and 1 jalapeno. But that's okay. That creates a little bit of space for us to pack our sauerkraut down tight. We want to pack it in as tightly as we can to let that brine rise over it and create that anaerobic or unoxygenated environment.
Okay. You ready? I'm ready to start packing. Okay. So, best part of this is literally just stuffing it in here. So you just want to get a good handful in there. And I'm already going to start packing it down a little bit.
If you don't have small enough hands to put inside your jar,
which I barely do,
that's where your tools come in handy. So we've got a good rubber spatula. Spoon is also helpful.
Anything that is able for you to get in there and actually pack the sauerkraut down is perfect. Probably hard to tell because of the labels, but you can kind of see that
Got some brine.
you've got some brine right there. And you really want to get the juicy parts of the sauerkraut in here because you really do want that brine. That is what is going to make the sauerkraut. Like I said in the beginning, that brine mixed with this bacteria that is on all fruits and vegetables and in some yogurts and other cultured foods is going to help make this the sauerkraut we all love.
Now, sometimes folks ask us the question, how full should I fill this jar?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always wise to leave yourself a little bit of space so that your jar is full, but not so full that when that fermentation action starts bubbling, you end up with sauerkraut all over your kitchen or your storage area. So we're going to leave a little bit of what we would call in canning headspace for the expansion that may happen as this starts to be active and bubbly. You can see that a lot of the space we have here on top has been covered with brine by the action of packing our sauerkraut down.
And it's hard to
Were that not the case, we've got about an inch of brine in the bottom of our bowl that we now could pour on top if we needed to.
We're lucky, and this is actually very briny. So there are multiple things that you can do. So once you get your sauerkraut filled and the brine is over all of the cabbage and the carrots and the jalapenos, everything that is in here, there are multiple things you can do. What I was taught when I first learned about making sauerkraut is to use your core, the core that I had cut out earlier, and just stuff it if it's big enough. This one's actually a kind of small core, and just stuff it down to make sure that everything is below that brine. You can also use one of the outer cabbage leaves if you feel comfortable, but you can also use a smaller jar. Now, this is going to be the most sterile way to do this, and so I do recommend doing it. See, you can see the brine is actually, it might be easier to do it in here, but that's how the cabbage and the carrot are going to be able to stay below that brine level. And now you can fill this jar if you need it to be heavier with marbles, dried chickpeas, dried beans of any kind, really. Right now, actually, this is working, but you can weigh it down with other things to fill in this jar. Now, this isn't sauerkraut just yet. You're going to have to take care of your sauerkraut for anywhere from 7 days to a couple weeks. Best place to store your sauerkraut is in cellar-like conditions. So that's in around 55 degrees Fahrenheit in a darker place, no direct sunlight, and pretty well ventilated, just so it's not stagnant air and all of that. Those conditions are actually what's going to help ferment the cabbage. So
if you don't have exactly those conditions, there may not be a place in your home that reaches that low of a temperature. It may change the speed of the fermentation action, but it doesn't mean that this will not work for you at all. So we said before, this is a very forgiving recipe. You can be confident that at whatever speed this process works for you, it is going to work. So this is something that you can feel safe tasting as the process goes on and evaluate how it seems to you, whether you need to adjust that timeline any.
And we recommend tasting it every, couple of days, once a week at least, just to see where it's going and to actually stop it when it gets the flavor that you like. Some people like it super fermented, and some people are like, oh, I kind of like the taste that it is after only a week. It's whatever your taste buds are. And so I recommend keep tasting it until it does get to that point that you like it at, and then I would go ahead and pop it in the fridge. Now, it is going to keep fermenting in the fridge. It just is going to take a lot longer. It's a lot longer process because it is so cold. It slows it down. And so it may change taste a little bit, like over time, but sauerkraut can last in your fridge for months, and it's safe to eat. Now, one of the biggest things that I hear is when people are storing their sauerkraut and they're, taking care of it over the next couple weeks, I'll tell you about how to take care of your sauerkraut. But one of the biggest things is what if it gets mold? And mold is actually an okay thing. Now, trust yourself and trust your gut, your nose, and your taste. So if the sauerkraut smells off or tastes off, totally get it. Throw it out if you do not feel comfortable. But it is okay if there is a little bit of mold on the top. Either, because sometimes a little piece of cabbage or carrot will float up to the top of the brine and can get some mold on it. And you can just scrape that off and throw it away, and the rest of it should be fine. But trust yourself, trust your gut. If it feels off, it probably is. So just go with that on that. Now, taking care of your sauerkraut. There are multiple different ways that you can actually, a lot of people are like, that does not seem super safe or anything. Like, what happens? Like, things can get in there, bugs can get in there. Well, you can always put a cloth or a paper towel over this and rubber band it from here. If you have, say, one of the cores that's stuck in there, you can also put a cloth or a paper towel and rubber band it. The fermentation will actually act faster. I might be wrong on this, but what I have seen from fermenting in the past is if you do a closed lid, so I put the lid on and close it, you'll be able to see the bubbles rise up and everything from the bottom. So that means it's working super well. But because it's fermenting, it can actually explode. So I'm telling you now, your sauerkraut can explode if you have the lid closed on it. So what you're going to want to do is, if you do want a lid on it and you want it closed, you're going to have to open that lid and burp it 1 to 2 times a day. I recommend doing it both morning and night. And
what you're doing there is just releasing the pressure in that gas that's built up as the bubbling action releases the byproduct gas in the sauerkraut. You're going to release that so that the pressure doesn't build up enough to stress your jar.
Yep.
Otherwise, you may have a mess on your hands.
Correct. And I do recommend putting your sauerkraut jars on a towel or in a pan, or what do they call it? A sheet pan?
Yeah, like a rim baking sheet.
Yeah, any kind of thing that will catch that liquid just in case anything happens. And also, if you want to have a lid on it, this is what I usually do. I keep a lid on it, but I don't put it on all the way. So it still has room for the gases to be able to be released, but it also means liquid can come out too. So I usually just put a towel down underneath of it so it just catches it. So it's, an easier cleanup, hopefully, for you if it does decide to leak.
If you get super into this process, you want to get all the gear, you can buy a special airlock that allows the gas to escape without letting air into your jar. Those are a cool product you can get at some specialized brewing stores, or you could always purchase something like that online. But you certainly don't need a specialized product to get started. As you've seen here today, we began with ordinary salt, our veggies, and an old peanut butter jar. That's about all you need for this first experiment to really see if this is something that, to your taste, that you're going to enjoy doing in the future.
Now we are finished making the sauerkraut, and we were wondering, does anyone have any questions about this process?
Because we've had such a hard time with microphones in this large space, and here we'll put in our plug of a big thanks to Newtown Baking, who's loaned us their kitchen for our filming today. We ask that if you have any questions, you type those into the chat and let us answer from that space.
While we are waiting on people, if they want to ask some questions, I'm just going to let you know that I will be sending an email out. I think I already said this, but an email out later this week with this recorded video, with resources that you can all check out to learn more about fermenting with the recipe that I technically used today. And so that will all be coming out to you within this week. There will also be a feedback form that we would love to hear your opinions about this class and how it went and how we can help bring these classes to the community in a better manner. So just let us know.
We also want to hold up a future class that we are excited to offer. Tess and I work through the AMI Farm at Augusta Health program, our Farm to Hospital initiative. So we're fortunate to have the expertise of Augusta Health clinicians to be able to share the more medical-focused nutritional side of really helping you to understand how fermentation works in your body to your benefit. So on September 29th, we'll be offering a second fermentation course with the help of gastroenterologist Dr. Savita Srivastava. She is a fantastic teacher and will really inspire you about the way that fermented foods can support your gut health. So I definitely think that's going to be a wonderful class. I encourage you to be there with us to share in it. So we'll be here for just a few moments more. If anyone has questions in the chat, just want to thank you all for supporting us and supporting Allegheny Mountain Institute through being a part of this class today. Thanks for being with us. All right, let's see. I am seeing a question about Himalayan pink salt. It's at least billed to be kind of the Cadillac of salt. I would say what matters most to me in salt choice is I want to get the purest product possible. sometimes salt that has an additive in it, like iodide, can change your product a little bit. So as long as your Himalayan pink salt is pure, does not have any added chemicals, go for it. Sea salt is also great.
That's what we use today.
We used, pure sea salt today. So many different options. Use what makes you happy. We are happy to stick around for any other questions folks may have. Oh, so we got a bonus. So today our medium cabbage made a big and a mini as far as our sauerkraut. And those should be ready to enjoy in the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah.
Okay, at this point, we are not seeing any other questions. I will encourage you, if you are trying this at home and you find you have a question as you are making it with your own hands, if you are not cooking along with us today, feel free to reach out to us by email. You should have our contact information as part of your class registration, and you will certainly have it once we send out our resource kit. We're here for you and happy to support you as we can as you get more veggies in your life through fermentation.
Happy fermenting.
Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, have a wonderful week, everyone.